The fire cracked in the great hall of Ashford Castle, but Elena Frost could not feel its warmth. Her hands trembled as she stood at the edge of the crowd, watching the man she loved raise another woman's hand into the air. Pack of Ashford, Damien's voice rolled across the hall like thunder. Tonight, I present to you the woman who will stand beside me. Seraphina Cole will be your Luna. The crowd roared with approval. Wolves howled outside the castle walls, their voices rising into the night sky in celebration. Elena pressed her back against the cold stone pillar and closed her eyes. She had known this day was coming for months. She had told herself she was ready. She was wrong. Seraphina stood tall beside Damien, her golden hair catching the candlelight, her smile sharp and certain. She looked like a queen already. She looked like she belonged there. And in every way that mattered to the Pack Council, she did belong. Her father commanded the Cole Pack, one of the strongest in the Northern Territories. This union would end a decade of tension between two powerful packs and secure peace for thousands of wolves. Elena understood the politics. She had grown up inside this world, daughter of the pack's late healer, trained since childhood to mend broken bones and calm fevered children. She was nobody's idea of a Luna. She had no army behind her name, no alliance to offer, nothing but steady hands and a quiet heart that had belonged to Damien Ashford since she was 16 years old. She turned to leave before the ceremony ended, unable to watch another moment. But as she pushed through the crowd toward the great doors, a warrior stumbled into the hall, blood soaking through the sleeve of his tunic. Gasps rippled through the room. Elena's training took over instantly, drowning out her heartbreak. "Bring him to the healing room," she called out, already moving toward him. Two men caught the injured warrior before he collapsed and carried him through a side corridor, Elena leading the way with fast, sure steps. Behind her, the celebration paused only briefly. Damien's eyes followed the commotion, some instinct in him pulling tight like a wire, though he could not explain why. Seraphina touched his arm and drew his attention back to the guests waiting to offer congratulations. He forced a smile and turned away from the corridor where Elena had disappeared. In the healing room, Elena worked quickly. The warrior, a young man named Owen who served in the Eastern Patrol, had been caught by a rogue wolf near the border. The wound was deep, but not fatal, if she moved fast enough. "Stay still," she told him, pressing a cloth soaked in herbs against the gash. "You're going to be fine. Just breathe." Owen groaned through gritted teeth. "Didn't expect to end my night, bleeding on your table, Elena." "Better my table than a grave," she said, focusing on her work. Her hands were steady even though her chest still ached from what she had witnessed in the Great Hall. This was the gift her mother had given her before she passed, the ability to keep her hands calm even when her heart was breaking. The door opened behind her. She did not need to look up to know who had entered. She felt it, the same way she always felt it. A pull low in her stomach that had never made sense to her, not since the first time Damien had walked into a room when she was still a girl, helping her mother grind medicine. "Is he going to live?" Damien asked, his voice quieter now, stripped of the commanding tone he had used in the hall. "Yes," Elena answered without turning around. "He'll need rest, but the wound isn't as bad as it looked." Damien stepped further into the room. He was still dressed in his ceremonial coat, the deep blue fabric embroidered with silver thread, marking him as Alpha King of the Ashford Pack. He looked out of place standing among jars of dried herbs and boiling water, a king in a healer's world. "You left the celebration early," he said. Elena's hands paused for the briefest moment before continuing their work. "There was an emergency." "There's always an emergency with you," he said, and though his tone was light, there was something underneath it, something searching. She finally looked up at him, and the moment their eyes met, something shifted in the room. It was not new. It had happened before. Small flashes of connection neither of them spoke about, moments where the air seemed to thicken and the world seemed to narrow down to just the two of them. Elena had always told herself it was nothing, a foolish girl's imagination, a lingering childhood affection she needed to grow out of. But this time, the feeling was stronger, sharper. It rooted itself somewhere behind her ribs and pulled tight, like a rope drawing two ends of the same thread together. Damien's breath caught. His golden eyes, the mark of his position as Alpha, flickered with something he did not understand. He took an involuntary step closer to her, his wolf stirring beneath his skin in a way it had never done in Serafina's presence. Owen, still lying on the table, glanced between the two of them with growing confusion, though he had the sense to say nothing. "Elena," Damien said, and her name sounded different in his mouth than it ever had before, heavier somehow, more important. "You should go back to your guests," Elena said quickly, breaking whatever had been building between them. She turned back to Owen's wound, her hands shaking now in a way they had not been moments earlier. "Serafina will be looking for you." Damien did not move for a long moment. Something inside him screamed that leaving this room was wrong, that everything about tonight, the ceremony, the promise he had just made in front of the entire pack, was wrong in a way he could not name. But duty was a habit bred into him since birth, and duty won. He nodded once, turned, and walked out of the healing room without another word. Elena did not breathe again until the door closed behind him. "You want to tell me what that was?" Owen asked from the table, wincing as she tied off the bandage. "Nothing," Elena said, too fast. "That was nothing. Didn't look like nothing to me. Looked like the kind of thing that gets people killed in stories my grandmother used to tell." Elena's hands stilled. "What kind of stories?" Owen shrugged, careful not to disturb his injured arm. "Mate bond stories. The old kind, before packs started arranging marriages for politics instead of letting fate pick." He studied her face, and whatever he saw there made his teasing smile fade. "You didn't know, did you?" "Know what?" "What that look was, between you and the Alpha." Elena forced a laugh that did not reach her eyes. "You've lost too much blood tonight, Owen. You're imagining things." But even as she said it, her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her own ears. She had felt something in that room, something powerful and undeniable, something that made her wolf howl with a longing she had never experienced before. She had spent years convincing herself her feelings for Damien were nothing more than admiration, respect, a foolish crush left over from adolescence. What if she had been wrong? She finished treating Owen in silence, her mind spinning through the implications. If what he felt tonight, what she felt, was truly the mate bond, then everything happening in the Great Hall right now, the celebration, the promise made to Serafina, all of it was built on a foundation that fate itself would eventually crack. She sent Owen home with instructions to rest and returned to her small quarters near the healing rooms, avoiding the Great Hall entirely. She could still hear music drifting from the celebration, laughter, and the clinking of cups, the sounds of a pack rejoicing in a union that was supposed to bring them peace. She sat on the edge of her bed and pressed her palms against her eyes. This was not supposed to happen. She had built her entire life around loving Damien from a careful distance, never close enough to be burned, never far enough to stop hoping in some small, buried part of her heart. She had told herself she could live like that forever, quietly, safely. But the mate bond did not care about safety. It did not care about politics or promises, or the careful walls she had built around her own heart. If what happened tonight was real, if the pull she felt was truly what Owen suggested, then nothing about her carefully controlled life would ever be simple again. Meanwhile, in the Great Hall, Damien stood beside Serafina, as pack members lined up to offer their congratulations. He smiled when expected, nodded when expected, said all the right words, but his mind kept drifting back to the healing room, to the way Elena's eyes had looked when she met his gaze, to the strange, powerful pull he had felt standing near her. He had felt something like this once before, years ago, when Elena was still barely more than a girl, and he a young warrior not yet crowned alpha. He had dismissed it then as nothing, a passing fascination with a healer's steady hands and quiet strength. He had buried it beneath duty and responsibility, and the expectations placed on him since the day he was born to lead this pack. But tonight, standing in a room meant to celebrate his future with another woman, that buried feeling had clawed its way back to the surface with a force he could not ignore. "You seem distracted," Serafina said, her voice smooth but her eyes sharp as she studied him. She had not survived years in her father's political court by missing details. She noticed the way his attention drifted, the way his jaw tightened when he thought no one was watching. "Long night," Damien said, forcing his focus back to her. "That's all." Serafina smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. Of course. We should retire soon. Tomorrow brings the formal announcement to the neighboring packs. There is much to prepare. Of course, Damien echoed, though his voice sounded distant even to himself. As the celebration wound down and guests began departing into the night, Damien found himself standing alone on the castle balcony, staring out over the dark forest that stretched toward the horizon. Somewhere within those trees, wolves howled their nightly songs, voices rising and falling in the ancient rhythm of the pack. He thought about Elena's hands, steady and sure as she treated Owen's wound. He thought about the way something in his chest had tightened the moment their eyes met, a feeling entirely different from anything he had ever experienced with Serafina, despite months of courtship and the promise of marriage now sealed before the entire pack. He told himself it meant nothing. He told himself it was exhaustion, the pressure of the ceremony, the weight of leadership finally catching up to him after years of carrying it without complaint. He told himself many things that night, standing alone under a sky full of stars, trying to convince his own heart of something his wolf refused to believe. But deep beneath his ribs, in the part of him that was more instinct than reason, more wolf than man, a single truth had already taken root, quiet and unshakable. He had just promised his future to the wrong woman. Inside the castle, Serafina watched him from a window, her expression calculating as she studied his rigid posture on the balcony. She had worked too hard, waited too long, sacrificed too much to let anything threaten this alliance. Whatever had shifted in Damien tonight, whatever had put that distant, troubled look in his eyes, she intended to discover it, and she intended to eliminate it, whatever it turned out to be. The next morning, the castle buzzed with preparation. Messengers were dispatched to neighboring packs carrying news of the formal engagement. Servants decorated the halls with fresh flowers and banners bearing the combined crests of the Ashford and Cole packs. The entire territory prepared to celebrate a union that would reshape the balance of power across the northern lands. Elena spent the morning in the healing rooms, grateful for the distraction of work. She treated a child's fever, restocked her herb supplies, checked on Owen's healing wound. She kept her hands busy and her mind occupied, refusing to let herself dwell on the events of the previous night. But when Damien appeared in her doorway just after midday, unannounced and alone, all her careful control threatened to shatter at once. "I need to speak with you," he said, his voice low, his eyes carrying the same troubled weight she had seen the night before. Elena's heart began to pound. "Alpha, I have patience waiting." "Elena," her name again, heavy with meaning. "Please." She set down the jar of herbs in her hands, her fingers trembling slightly, and turned to face him fully for the first time since the ceremony. The morning light filtering through the window caught the gold flecks in his eyes, and once again, that undeniable pull settled into her chest. Impossible to ignore, impossible to explain away as imagination, or exhaustion, or anything other than exactly what it was. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The silence between them stretched, heavy with everything neither dared to say aloud. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, their voices rising toward the pale winter sky, as if even the pack itself sensed that something had shifted, something ancient and powerful had awakened, and nothing that followed would ever be simple again. Damien closed the door behind him, shutting out the sounds of the busy castle beyond the healing room walls. For a moment, neither he nor Elena spoke. The air between them felt thick, charged with something neither of them had the courage to name out loud. "I have been trying to convince myself that last night meant nothing," Damien finally said, his voice rough. "I have failed." Elena wrapped her arms around herself, as if bracing against a cold wind that only she could feel. "Damien, you're engaged. The whole pack celebrated it last night." "Serafina." "I know what I promised," he interrupted, though his tone held no anger, only exhaustion. "I know exactly what I promised, and to whom, and why. None of that has changed." "Then what do you want from me?" He crossed the room slowly, stopping a careful distance away from her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, far enough that neither of them could claim anything improper had happened. "I want to understand what I felt last night. I want to know if you felt it too." Elena's throat tightened. Lying to him would be easy. She could tell him it was nothing, that Owen's ridiculous stories about mate bonds had gotten into her head, that she had imagined the entire connection. It would be easy, and it would be safe, and it would let them both continue on the paths already laid out before them. But she had never been able to lie to Damien, not once in all the years she had known him. "Yes," she whispered, "I felt it." Something in Damien's shoulders relaxed, though his expression remained troubled. "Then you understand why I cannot simply pretend nothing happened." "You have to," Elena said, though the words tasted bitter in her mouth. "Damien, think about what's at stake. Your engagement to Serafina isn't just a promise between two people. It's a peace treaty. It's protection for thousands of wolves who have lived under the threat of war between our packs for a decade. If you break that promise now, over a feeling neither of us can even explain." "It's not just a feeling," Damien said, cutting her off. "You know what it is. I know what it is. We've both heard the old stories. The mate bond doesn't announce itself gently, Elena. It doesn't wait for a convenient time. It simply arrives, and once it does, ignoring it comes with consequences." Elena knew the stories too, whispered legends passed down through generations of wolves, tales of alphas who rejected their true mates and slowly lost themselves to grief and madness, their wolves turning feral with the pain of an unfulfilled bond. She had always assumed such stories were exaggerated, cautionary tales meant to frighten young wolves into taking fate seriously. Now, standing close enough to Damien to feel the heat of his skin, she was no longer certain the stories were exaggerated at all. "What are you suggesting?" she asked carefully. "That you break your engagement? That you humiliate Serafina and her entire pack in front of every wolf in the Northern Territories? That you risk a war that could cost thousands of lives, all because of something we felt in a healing room?" Damien's jaw tightened. He knew she was right. He had spent his entire life being trained to put the pack above his own desires, to sacrifice personal happiness for the greater good of his people. Every lesson his father had ever taught him screamed that duty must come first. "No," he said finally, though the words seemed to cost him something. "I am not suggesting that, not yet. I need time to think. I need to understand what this bond means, and whether there is any way to honor my promise to Serafina while also acknowledging what exists between us." "There isn't," Elena said quietly. "You know there isn't. A mate bond doesn't share space with another marriage, Damien. It consumes everything else." He studied her for a long moment, and she could see the war raging behind his eyes, duty against instinct, promise against fate. "Then perhaps the answer is that I ignore it. Perhaps I bury this feeling deep enough that it fades over time. Other alphas have done it before." "And what happened to them?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer, could see it in the flicker of doubt crossing his face. Damien did not answer. He did not need to. They both knew the old stories rarely ended well for wolves who chose to fight against fate. "I should go," he said finally, stepping back from her. "I have responsibilities to attend to. The formal announcement to the neighboring packs happens in 3 days." "There is much to prepare," Elena nodded, though something in her chest ached at his retreat. "Of course." He paused at the door, his hand resting against the frame, his back still turned to her. "Elena, whatever happens, I need you to know that what I felt last night was real. I am not imagining it, and I am not exaggerating it. I simply do not yet know what to do with it." "Neither do I," she admitted softly. He left without another word, and Elena sank onto the edge of her small cot, her hands pressed against her face. She had spent years training herself not to hope, not to imagine a future where Damien chose her over the countless political obligations weighing down his crown. She had believed herself successful in that discipline. Now, in the space of a single day, everything she had carefully constructed had begun to crumble. Over the following days, Damien threw himself into pack business with a ferocity that worried even his most trusted advisors. He reviewed Border Patrol schedules 3 times over. He met with visiting dignitaries from smaller packs seeking alliances. He inspected the training grounds where young warriors practiced their combat skills, offering corrections and guidance with an intensity that left the trainees exhausted by midday. His beta, a steady and observant wolf named Marcus, watched his alpha's behavior with growing concern. Marcus had served beside Damien since childhood, had fought alongside him in border skirmishes, had celebrated victories and mourned losses together. He knew Damien better than almost anyone in the pack, and he recognized the signs of a wolf fighting an internal battle he refused to speak about. "You've barely slept in 3 days," Marcus observed one evening, finding Damien still awake in the castle's private study, long after most of the pack had retired for the night. "Whatever is troubling you, it might help to speak of it." "I am fine," Damien said, not looking up from the papers scattered across his desk, documents he had been staring at, without truly reading for the better part of an hour. Marcus crossed his arms and leaned against the doorframe, unconvinced. "You've reorganized the Eastern Patrol schedule 4 times this week. The men are starting to talk. Let them talk." Damien. Marcus rarely used his given name instead of his title, and the shift in address caught the Alpha's attention immediately. "Something happened the night of the ceremony. I saw it in your face when you returned to the hall." "What is it?" For a long moment, Damien said nothing, weighing the wisdom of confiding in even his most trusted friend. Finally, exhaustion won over caution, and he set down his pen with a heavy sigh. "I believe I found my true mate," he said quietly. "The night I announced my engagement to Serafina." Marcus's expression shifted from concern to alarm within a heartbeat. "Who?" "Elena Frost." Marcus was silent for a long moment, processing the weight of what his Alpha had just revealed. He had known Elena for years, had watched her grow from a shy healer's apprentice into a skilled and respected member of the pack. He had also, if he was honest with himself, occasionally noticed the way Damien's attention seemed to linger whenever she was near, though he had never voiced the observation aloud. "That complicates things considerably," Marcus finally said. "That is an understatement," Damien replied, dragging a hand through his hair. "I don't know what to do, Marcus. Every instinct in my body tells me the bond is real, undeniable, something I cannot simply ignore or wish away. But my promise to Serafina, the alliance it represents, the peace it secures for our people, all of that remains true regardless of what I feel. Does Elena know how you feel?" "She feels it too." Marcus exhaled slowly, running through the implications in his mind. As Beta, his role was to advise his Alpha on matters affecting the pack's stability, and few matters carried more weight than the potential collapse of a carefully negotiated peace treaty. If you break the engagement, the Cole Pack will see it as an insult. Serafina's father has spent years building toward this alliance. He will not accept rejection quietly. "I know. But if you ignore the bond, you risk your own stability, and by extension, the stability of the entire pack. An Alpha who fights against fate does not remain strong for long. You've read the histories same as I have." "I know that too," Damien said, frustration bleeding into his voice for the first time. "There is no path forward that does not cause harm to someone. I simply have to decide which harm I am willing to live with." Marcus studied his friend for a long moment, seeing clearly now the weight pressing down on him, a burden far heavier than mere political strategy. "For what it's worth," he said finally, "I don't believe there's truly a choice here at all. Not really. The mate bond doesn't offer alternatives, Damien. It simply exists, and eventually, it demands to be honored, whether we're ready or not." Damien said nothing, but the truth of his friend's words settled heavily in his chest, a truth he had been avoiding since the moment his eyes had met Elena's across the healing room 3 nights before. Outside, the winter wind howled against the castle walls, carrying with it the distant cries of wolves running through the moonlit forest. Voices raised in a chorus that seemed, to Damien's troubled ears, to echo the very conflict raging within his own heart. Serafina Cole had not become the daughter of one of the most powerful Alphas in the Northern Territories by ignoring the small signs that others might dismiss. She had learned from childhood to read a room, to notice the slight shift in a person's posture, the fraction of hesitation before a response, the details that revealed truth beneath polished words. And for the past week, everything about Damien Ashford had felt slightly, unmistakably wrong. She sat in her chambers within the castle, staring out the window at the training grounds below, watching Damien instruct a group of young warriors with far more intensity than the exercise required. He had barely spent an hour with her in the past 5 days, always citing pack business, border concerns, preparations for the formal announcement. She might have believed him, had she not noticed the way his gaze occasionally drifted toward the healing rooms whenever they walked the castle corridors together. She had also noticed something else. A healer named Elena Frost, quiet and unremarkable by most standards, had begun appearing in Damien's schedule with unusual frequency. A consultation about the pack's medical supplies, a discussion about training injuries among the warriors. Small, reasonable excuses, each one individually unremarkable, but together forming a pattern Serafina's sharp instincts refused to ignore. She summoned her personal attendant, a young wolf named Grace who had traveled with her from the Coal Territory and remained fiercely loyal to her mistress above all else. "I need you to watch someone for me," Serafina said without preamble, once Grace had closed the chamber door behind her. "Of course, my lady. Who?" "A healer. Elena Frost. I want to know everywhere she goes, everyone she speaks with, and most importantly, any interaction she has with the Alpha." Grace's eyebrows rose slightly, though she was too well trained to question her mistress directly. "May I ask what has drawn your attention to her?" Serafina's expression hardened into something calculating and cold. "A feeling, nothing more, yet. But I intend to confirm whether that feeling holds any truth, and I need eyes I can trust to help me discover it." Grace nodded and departed to begin her quiet surveillance, and Serafina turned back to the window, watching Damien below, her mind already spinning through possibilities and contingencies. She had not sacrificed years of careful political maneuvering, had not endured countless tedious diplomatic dinners and strategic marriages proposed and rejected, only to lose her position now to some unremarkable healer with steady hands and a quiet demeanor. Whatever was happening between Damien and this Elena Frost, Serafina intended to end it before it could threaten everything she had worked to secure. Over the following days, Grace reported back with small but telling observations. Elena had been summoned to the Alpha's private study on 3 separate occasions, each meeting lasting longer than any legitimate medical consultation required. Servants whispered that the healer's cheeks often flushed when the Alpha's name was mentioned in her presence. And perhaps most damning of all, Marcus, the Alpha's most trusted beta, had been seen exchanging quiet, serious conversations with Elena on 2 occasions. Conversations that ended abruptly whenever anyone else approached. Armed with this information, Serafina decided the time had come for a direct confrontation, though she chose her target carefully. Approaching Damien directly would likely result in denial and defensiveness, giving him time to prepare his response and shore up whatever lies he intended to tell her. Approaching Elena, however, might yield more honest results from someone less practiced in political deception. She found Elena alone in the healing rooms late one afternoon, carefully measuring dried herbs into small paper packets for distribution among the pack's elderly members. Elena looked up as the door opened, and her expression shifted immediately from calm concentration to visible unease upon recognizing her visitor. "Lady Serafina," Elena said, setting down her work and offering a respectful bow. "Is there something I can help you with?" Serafina studied the healer for a long moment before responding, taking in every detail, the slight tremor in Elena's hands, the way she avoided direct eye contact, the tension visible in her shoulders. All of it confirmed what Serafina had already suspected. "I think you know exactly why I've come," Serafina said, her voice deceptively calm. Elena's throat tightened. "I'm afraid I don't understand." "Don't insult my intelligence," Serafina said, her tone sharpening. "I have eyes throughout this castle, Elena Frost. I know about the private meetings. I know about the way Damien's attention lingers whenever your name is mentioned. I am not a fool, and I will not be treated like one." Elena's face paled, but she forced herself to remain composed. "Whatever you believe you've observed, I assure you nothing improper has occurred." "Improper is a matter of definition," Serafina replied coldly. "I don't need proof of physical impropriety to recognize a threat when I see one. Something has shifted since the night of our engagement ceremony. I felt it in Damien's behavior immediately, and every piece of information I've gathered since has only confirmed my suspicions." Elena's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table for support. She had no experience with political confrontation, had spent her life among healing herbs and injured warriors, rather than the calculated games of pack politics. She felt entirely unprepared to face the sharp intelligence and controlled fury radiating from the woman standing before her. "I never sought anything from Alpha Damien," Elena said honestly. "I have known him since childhood, nothing more." "And yet something has clearly changed," Serafina pressed. "I want to know what." Elena hesitated, torn between honesty and self-preservation. Lying to Serafina felt dangerous, given the woman's obvious perceptiveness, but revealing the truth about the mate bond felt equally dangerous, perhaps more so. She had no way of predicting how Serafina might react to such devastating news, or what actions she might take to protect her position. "I cannot speak to whatever changes you believe you've noticed in the Alpha," Elena said carefully. "I can only tell you that I have never encouraged any inappropriate attention from him, and I have no intention of interfering with his engagement to you." It was not entirely a lie, though it was far from the complete truth. Elena had not actively encouraged Damien's attention, had in fact tried repeatedly to discourage it, urging him toward duty and away from the dangerous pull neither of them fully understood. Serafina studied her for a long moment, searching for cracks in the healer's composure, but found only careful, practiced calm. Whatever this woman was hiding, she was better at concealing it than Serafina had anticipated. "Understand something, Elena Frost," Serafina said finally, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I have spent years preparing to become Luna of this pack. My father has invested enormous resources into securing this alliance. Thousands of wolves depend on the peace this union will bring. I will not allow some quiet healer, no matter how innocent her intentions might claim to be, to threaten everything at stake." "I have no intention of threatening anything," Elena said, though her voice wavered slightly. "See that you don't," Serafina replied, turning toward the door. She paused before leaving, glancing back over her shoulder with an expression that carried unmistakable warning. "I am watching you, healer. Both of you, and I promise you, whatever this is, whatever strange connection you believe exists between yourself and my future husband, I will not allow it to survive." The door closed behind her, and Elena finally allowed herself to collapse into a nearby chair, her entire body trembling with the aftermath of the confrontation. She pressed her hands against her face, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. Serafina's warning echoed in her mind long after the woman had departed. Elena had never wanted any of this, had never sought to disrupt the pack's carefully arranged peace, or threaten anyone's position. She had simply existed, quietly loving a man she could never truly have, until fate had cruelly decided to complicate everything with an undeniable bond neither she nor Damien had asked for. She thought about leaving the territory entirely, disappearing quietly before the situation could grow any more dangerous. The thought had crossed her mind more than once over the past week, though she had always dismissed it as cowardice, as running from a problem rather than facing it. Now, faced with Serafina's clear and calculated hostility, the idea began to feel less like cowardice and more like necessary self-preservation. Meanwhile, Serafina returned to her chambers and began composing a carefully worded letter to her father, detailing her suspicions about the growing threat to their alliance. She trusted her father's guidance in matters of political strategy above all else, and she needed his counsel now more than ever. Needed to understand what steps might be necessary to eliminate any obstacle standing between herself and the position she had worked so hard to secure. Her father's response arrived 2 days later, carried by a swift messenger wolf who had traveled through the night to deliver it. Serafina read the letter alone in her chambers, her expression growing increasingly resolute as she absorbed her father's carefully measured advice. He counseled patience, first and foremost, reminding her that hasty action often created more problems than it solved. He suggested she gather additional evidence before taking any decisive steps, ensuring that whatever course of action she eventually pursued would withstand scrutiny from the Pack Council should the matter ever require formal intervention. And he reminded her, in no uncertain terms, of exactly how much depended on this alliance succeeding, for both their pack and the broader stability of the Northern Territories. Serafina folded the letter carefully and placed it in a locked drawer within her desk. Her father's guidance, as always, proved wise and measured. She would gather more evidence. She would wait for the perfect opportunity to act, rather than striking prematurely and risking exposure of her own machinations. But she would not simply wait idly. Patience did not mean inaction. It meant careful, deliberate preparation, ensuring that when the moment finally arrived to remove Elena Frost from Damien's life permanently, her plan would be flawless, undeniable, and impossible to trace back to her own involvement. She began cultivating relationships with servants throughout the castle, offering small favors and kind words that bought loyalty and information in equal measure. She learned Elena's daily schedule, her habits, the small vulnerabilities that might eventually prove useful. She studied the political landscape of the Pack Council, identifying which members might prove sympathetic to concerns about the Alpha's questionable behavior, and which might require more careful persuasion. Slowly, methodically, Serafina built the foundation for whatever action would eventually become necessary, all while maintaining a composed, gracious public appearance that gave no indication of the calculated strategy unfolding beneath the surface. Damien, consumed by his own internal struggle between duty and instinct, remained largely unaware of the quiet campaign building against Elena. He continued dividing his time between Pack responsibilities and stolen moments with Elena that grew increasingly difficult to resist, despite both their best efforts to maintain appropriate distance. The formal announcement to the neighboring packs approached rapidly, a grand ceremony planned to solidify the engagement before representatives from across the Northern Territories. As preparations intensified, so too did the tensions simmering beneath the surface of Ashford Castle, an undercurrent of secrets and suspicion that threatened to erupt at any moment. Elena, sensing the growing danger surrounding her, made a decision that would prove far more difficult than she anticipated. She resolved to distance herself completely from Damien, to refuse any further private meetings, to bury whatever connection existed between them deep enough that even Serafina's sharp instincts could find no further evidence to fuel her suspicions. It was, Elena told herself, the only responsible path forward. The mate bond, powerful as it was, could not be permitted to destroy an alliance that protected thousands of innocent wolves. Her own heart, however painful the sacrifice, mattered far less than the stability and safety of the entire pack. She did not yet know how impossible her resolution would prove to maintain, nor how quickly fate would intervene to test the strength of her resolve. The formal announcement ceremony arrived beneath a sky heavy with winter clouds, and Ashford Castle filled with representatives from a dozen neighboring packs, all eager to witness the alliance that would reshape the balance of power across the Northern Territories. Banners bearing the combined crests of the Ashford and Cole packs hung from every wall, and the great hall had been transformed into a space of overwhelming grandeur, candles blazing in every corner, tables laden with food prepared for the celebration to follow. Elena had intended to avoid the ceremony entirely, citing healing duties as her excuse, but pack tradition required the attendance of all senior staff members, and as head healer, her absence would draw unwanted attention. She stood near the back of the hall, dressed in a simple gray gown that allowed her to blend into the crowd, watching as Damien and Serafina took their positions at the front of the room. Damien looked every bit the powerful Alpha King the pack needed him to be, dressed in formal attire befitting the occasion, his expression composed and confident as he greeted the arriving dignitaries. Only someone who knew him intimately, someone who had spent countless private moments studying the subtle shifts in his expression, would have noticed the tension tightening his jaw, the slight stiffness in his posture that betrayed the internal conflict he worked so hard to conceal. Serafina, for her part, played her role flawlessly, gracious and composed, greeting each dignitary with practiced charm, her hand resting possessively on Damien's arm throughout the proceedings. If she felt any of the suspicion or hostility she had directed at Elena days earlier, she gave no outward indication, her public performance seamless and convincing. The ceremony proceeded through its formal stages, speeches from pack elders praising the wisdom of the alliance, toasts raised to celebrate the future peace it would secure, gifts presented from visiting delegations as symbols of goodwill and cooperation. Elena watched it all from her position near the back wall, forcing herself to maintain a neutral expression, despite the ache building steadily in her chest. She had promised herself she would distance herself from Damien, would bury whatever connection existed between them, for the sake of the pack's stability. Watching him now, Formally bound to another woman before representatives of the entire Northern Territory, she understood with painful clarity exactly how necessary that distance truly was. As the formal proceedings concluded, and the celebration shifted toward more relaxed festivities, Elena attempted to slip quietly from the hall, hoping to return to the solitude of the healing rooms before anyone noticed her departure. She had nearly reached the doors when a voice stopped her. Leaving so soon? She turned to find Marcus, Damien's beta, standing nearby with 2 cups of wine, one of which he offered to her. She accepted it out of politeness, though her hands trembled slightly as she took the cup. "I have patients to check on," she said, though the excuse sounded weak, even to her own ears. Marcus studied her with the same perceptive gaze he had turned on Damien days earlier, a gaze that missed very little. "Elena, I know about the bond. Damien told me." Her breath caught. "Then you understand why I need to leave." "I understand why you might think that," Marcus said carefully. "But running from this problem won't solve it. If anything, distance seems to make the pull stronger, not weaker. I've seen the way Damien looks for you in every room he enters, even when he tries to hide it." Elena's throat tightened painfully. "What would you have me do instead, Marcus? Stand here and watch him marry someone else while my own heart tears itself apart? Serafina has already threatened me. She knows something has changed, even if she doesn't fully understand what. If I remain close to Damien, I risk making everything worse. For him, for the pack, for everyone." "And if you leave?" Marcus asked quietly. "Have you considered what that might do to him? The old stories about rejected mate bonds aren't exaggerations, Elena. I've seen what happens to an alpha whose wolf believes it has lost its true mate. It isn't gentle, and it isn't quick." Elena had considered exactly that possibility, had lain awake at night turning it over in her mind, weighing the risks against each other with no clear answer emerging from the calculation. Staying near Damien risked Serafina's growing hostility and the potential collapse of a crucial alliance. Leaving risked triggering whatever devastating consequences the old stories warned about. There seemed no path forward that did not carry significant danger. For herself, for Damien, for the pack she had sworn to serve and protect through her healing work. "I don't know what else to do," she admitted quietly, her composure finally cracking beneath the weight of everything pressing down on her. Marcus's expression softened slightly. "Perhaps there isn't a perfect answer available to you right now. But running without warning, disappearing without giving Damien any chance to understand or prepare, that seems like the option most likely to cause real harm." Before Elena could respond, a new voice interrupted their quiet conversation. "Marcus? Elena, I wasn't aware the two of you were such close friends." Serafina's voice cut through the ambient noise of the celebration like a blade, sharp and deliberately pointed. She had approached without either of them noticing, her expression carefully neutral, though her eyes carried unmistakable warning as they moved between the two of them. "Lady Serafina," Marcus said, recovering quickly and offering a respectful bow. "We were simply discussing pack matters. Elena mentioned some concerns about our medical supplies heading into winter." "How thoughtful of you to concern yourself with such details on my engagement day," Serafina said, her tone light, but her gaze fixed pointedly on Elena. "Though I confess, I find it curious how frequently our healer's name seems to arise whenever anything of importance occurs within this castle." Elena felt heat rising in her cheeks, despite her best efforts to remain composed. "I should return to my duties," she said quietly, setting down the wine cup Marcus had given her. "Please excuse me." She departed the hall as quickly as propriety allowed, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and frustration. Behind her, she could hear Serafina's voice continuing to address Marcus, though she could no longer make out the specific words. Once safely within the corridor leading toward the healing rooms, Elena finally allowed herself to lean against the cold stone wall, taking several deep breaths to steady her racing pulse. Every interaction with Serafina left her feeling more exposed, more vulnerable, as though the other woman's sharp gaze could see straight through every careful precaution Elena attempted to maintain. She had nearly reached her private quarters when Damien appeared at the end of the corridor, having apparently slipped away from his own engagement celebration to seek her out. His expression carried obvious concern as he took in her flushed cheeks and trembling hands. What happened? He asked, closing the distance between them quickly. Elena, are you all right? I'm fine, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. You should return to the celebration, Damien. Serafina will notice your absence. Serafina noticed my absence the moment I stopped paying her constant attention, Damien replied, his tone carrying a weariness that suggested the political performance was taking its toll on him as well. Tell me what happened. Elena hesitated, but something in his steady gaze made deception feel impossible, just as it always had between them. She confronted me again. She suspects something, Damien, though I don't believe she fully understands what. She's watching us both carefully. Damien's jaw tightened with frustration. This cannot continue indefinitely. I cannot keep pretending nothing has changed, while simultaneously feeling this bond pulling stronger every single day we spend near each other. Then what do you propose? Elena asked, echoing the question that had haunted both of them since the night everything began. Before Damien could answer, footsteps echoed from further down the corridor, and both of them stepped back from each other instinctively, creating appropriate distance just as one of the castle servants rounded the corner, carrying fresh linens toward the guest chambers. The servant offered a respectful nod and continued past without apparent suspicion, though Elena's heart continued racing long after the footsteps had faded. We cannot keep meeting like this, she whispered once they were alone again. Every moment we spend together, every private conversation, only adds fuel to Serafina's suspicions. If she gathers enough evidence, if she brings her concerns before the Pack Council, the consequences could be catastrophic, not just for us, but for the entire alliance. I know, Damien said, though frustration colored his voice. But avoiding you doesn't seem to weaken this pull between us. If anything, staying away only makes the ache worse, a constant reminder of something missing that I cannot quite name. Elena understood exactly what he meant, had felt the same restless ache during the days she had attempted to maintain distance, a hollow feeling that settled deep in her chest whenever too much time passed without seeing him. The old stories about mate bonds had never described this particular symptom in detail, but she suspected now that this growing ache represented an early warning of exactly the devastating consequences Marcus had described. I need time to think, Damien finally said, running a frustrated hand through his hair. There has to be some path forward that doesn't destroy everything. The alliance, the Pack's stability, your safety. I refuse to believe fate would present us with this bond only to demand impossible sacrifice in return. Elena wished she shared his confidence, but as she watched him return toward the celebration hall, his shoulders squared with the weight of leadership he carried so constantly, she could not shake the growing certainty that whatever path lay ahead of them would demand sacrifice from someone, regardless of how desperately they searched for an alternative. That night, after the celebration finally concluded and the castle settled into quiet darkness, Serafina sat alone in her chambers, reviewing everything Grace had reported to her throughout the evening. The corridor conversation between Marcus and Elena, the private moment between Damien and Elena that a second servant had witnessed and reported back to Grace, who in turn reported it to her mistress. The pattern had become undeniable now. Whatever connection existed between her fiancé and this quiet healer, it ran far deeper than mere friendship or professional respect. Serafina had encountered enough political intrigue throughout her life to recognize the unmistakable signs of a genuine threat when she saw one. She thought of her father's counsel toward patience, toward careful preparation before decisive action. She had followed that guidance faithfully for days now, gathering evidence, building her case, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. But watching Damien slip away from his own engagement celebration to seek out Elena Frost, watching the barely concealed longing in his eyes whenever the healer's name arose in conversation, Serafina's patience finally began wearing thin. She would give the situation a little more time, she decided, a little more careful observation, a little more evidence gathering. But her tolerance for this threat to her future was rapidly diminishing, and soon, very soon, she intended to take whatever action proved necessary to eliminate it entirely, regardless of the cost to anyone standing in her way. 3 weeks passed following the formal announcement ceremony, weeks during which the tension within Ashford Castle grew thicker with each passing day. Elena had tried, truly tried, to maintain the distance she believed necessary. declining Damien's occasional attempts at private conversation, focusing entirely on her healing duties, avoiding the Great Hall whenever possible, to minimize any chance encounters that might fuel Serafina's suspicions further. But avoidance, she discovered, brought its own painful consequences. The restless ache Damien had described weeks earlier had settled permanently into her chest, a hollow feeling that intensified with every day that passed without seeing him. She found herself sleeping poorly, her appetite diminishing, her usually steady hands trembling slightly during even routine healing tasks. Owen, still visiting occasionally to have his healed wound checked, commented more than once on her exhausted appearance, though she brushed off his concerns with practiced deflection. Damien fared no better. Marcus reported to Elena, during one of their increasingly rare private conversations, that the Alpha's temper had grown shorter, his patience during pack council meetings noticeably thinner. He had snapped at warriors during training exercises for minor infractions that would normally have earned nothing more than gentle correction. He had grown distant with Serafina during their required public appearances, his composed mask slipping more frequently as exhaustion and internal conflict wore away at his careful control. "This cannot continue," Marcus told Elena bluntly during one such conversation, finding her alone in the healing rooms late one evening. "Whatever the two of you are attempting, staying apart clearly isn't working. If anything, it seems to be making everything worse. What choice do we have?" Elena asked, exhaustion evident in her voice. "Serafina watches everything. Every meeting, every conversation, adds fuel to suspicions that could destroy the alliance if they're ever confirmed. I cannot be responsible for that, Marcus. I won't be. And what about Damien's well-being? What about your own? You look like you haven't slept properly in weeks." Elena had no answer for that, because Marcus's observation held painful truth. She had begun to understand, with growing dread, exactly what the old stories about rejected mate bonds truly meant. This wasn't simple heartache or ordinary longing. This was something deeper, more physical, a genuine sickness settling into both her body and her spirit, growing steadily worse with each day of enforced separation. That evening, unable to sleep despite genuine physical exhaustion, Elena found herself walking the castle's outer gardens beneath a clear winter sky, scattered with stars. The cold air felt bracing against her skin, a welcome distraction from the constant ache that had become her near-permanent companion. She had nearly completed a full circuit of the garden paths when she noticed a figure standing near the stone fountain at the garden's center, silhouetted against the moonlight. Even from a distance she recognized Damien's familiar posture, and her traitorous heart lifted despite every rational argument screaming that she should turn back immediately. She should have returned to her quarters. She should have avoided this chance encounter entirely, maintained the careful distance she had worked so hard to establish. Instead, her feet carried her forward, drawn toward him with an inevitability that felt entirely beyond her control. Damien turned as she approached, and even in the dim moonlight, she could see the exhaustion etched into his features. Dark circles beneath his eyes, tension held tight in his shoulders. "Elena," he said quietly, and the simple sound of her name in his voice sent warmth flooding through her chest for the first time in weeks. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, stopping a respectful distance away from him, though every instinct urged her closer. "Neither could I," Damien said, a tired smile touching his lips. "It seems we share that particular affliction lately." They stood in silence for a long moment, neither quite willing to break whatever fragile peace existed between them in this quiet garden, away from watching eyes and political calculations. Elena studied his face, memorizing the details, the strong line of his jaw, the golden warmth of his eyes even in darkness, the small scar above his eyebrow from some childhood mishap he had once told her about during a rare unguarded moment years ago. "I've been thinking," Damien said finally, breaking the silence. "About everything, the bond, the engagement, all of it. I don't have answers, Elena. I wish I did. Desperately. But I know that continuing to force distance between us isn't sustainable. Not for either of us." "What are you suggesting?" she asked carefully, though hope and fear warred equally within her chest. "I don't know," he admitted, frustration evident in his voice. "Perhaps nothing changes immediately. Perhaps I simply need more time to determine how to navigate this situation without causing catastrophic harm to the Alliance, to the Pack, to everyone depending on the peace this engagement represents. Elena nodded slowly. Though something in her chest sank with disappointment, she immediately felt guilty for feeling. What had she expected him to say? That he intended to abandon everything, break his engagement immediately, choose personal happiness over the responsibility he had carried his entire life. She had no right to expect such a dramatic declaration, no matter how deeply some foolish part of her heart yearned for exactly that. "Damien," she said softly, "I don't think more time will change the fundamental problem. Either you honor your promise to Serafina, or you don't. Either the alliance survives, or it collapses. There's no middle path where everyone gets exactly what they want, without anyone suffering real consequences." "I refuse to believe that," Damien said, though his voice carried less conviction than his words suggested. "There has to be some solution neither of us has considered yet." Elena studied him for a long moment, seeing clearly now the exhaustion of a man caught impossibly between duty and desire, searching desperately for an answer that simply did not exist. Watching him struggle, watching the toll this impossible situation continued taking on him, on his health, his temper, his ability to lead effectively, something inside her finally crystallized into painful clarity. She could not continue being the source of his internal conflict. She could not continue watching him tear himself apart, searching for solutions that would never materialize. And she certainly could not continue risking Serafina's growing suspicion, knowing the political catastrophe that would follow if their connection was ever fully exposed and confirmed. There was only one solution remaining that offered any genuine hope of resolution, however painful it might prove to enact. "I should return to my quarters," she said instead, unwilling to voice the decision already forming in her mind. "It's late, and you have council meetings scheduled early tomorrow." Damien's expression flickered with something like disappointment, though he nodded in acceptance. "Of course. Good night, Elena." "Good night, Damien." She walked away from him through the moonlit garden, forcing herself not to look back, knowing that if she did, her resolve might crumble entirely. By the time she reached her private quarters, tears streamed silently down her cheeks, grief already settling into her chest for a decision she had not yet fully committed to, but somehow already knew was inevitable. Over the following 2 days, Elena moved through her healing duties with mechanical precision, her mind constantly returning to the difficult choice weighing on her heart. She thought of Owen's stories about rejected mate bonds, about the devastating consequences that might befall Damien should she simply disappear without warning. But she also thought about the alternative, about continuing to exist as a constant source of temptation and conflict, watching him slowly destroy himself, trying to navigate an impossible situation that had no clean resolution. She thought about Serafina's barely concealed threats, about the very real danger that continued proximity might eventually pose, not just to herself, but to the fragile peace between two powerful packs that thousands of innocent wolves depended upon for their safety and stability. By the third night, her decision had solidified completely. She would leave. Not permanently, perhaps, though even that possibility remained uncertain. But she needed distance, real distance, far enough away that neither Damien's temptation nor Serafina's suspicion could continue building toward inevitable catastrophe. Perhaps with enough time and space, the intensity of the bond might fade to something manageable. Perhaps Damien could focus fully on his responsibilities to Serafina and the pack without her constant, complicating presence nearby. She packed only what she could carry easily, a small bag containing basic supplies, some dried herbs and medical tools that might prove useful wherever she eventually settled, a few personal keepsakes too precious to leave behind. She left instructions for her healing assistant regarding ongoing patient care, careful notes ensuring the pack's medical needs would continue being met in her absence. She wrote no farewell letter to Damien. She feared that any attempt at explanation would only complicate matters further, might tempt him to search for her, to convince her to return before enough time had passed for genuine healing to occur. Better, she reasoned, to simply disappear cleanly, allowing him space to fully commit himself to Serafina and the alliance, without any lingering hope that circumstances might somehow change. She left in the deepest hours of night, when the castle's residents slept most soundly, and the chance of encountering anyone who might question her departure remained lowest. She slipped through the servants' entrance near the kitchen, avoiding the main gates where guards maintained careful watch, and made her way into the surrounding forest under cover of darkness. The night air felt bitterly cold against her skin as she walked, her breath forming small clouds with each exhale, the crunch of frost-covered leaves beneath her boots the only sound accompanying her lonely journey. She had no clear destination in mind, only a desperate need to put sufficient distance between herself and everything she was leaving behind. She thought of her mother, gone now for several years, wondering what wisdom she might have offered in this impossible situation. She thought of Owen and the other pack members she had treated and cared for over the years, patients she was abandoning without proper farewell. Most painfully, she thought of Damien, imagining his reaction when he eventually discovered her absence, hoping desperately that her sacrifice would somehow ease his burden rather than compound it. By dawn, she had traveled far enough from Ashford territory that the familiar landmarks of home had faded entirely from view, replaced by unfamiliar forest, stretching in every direction. She found a small clearing and allowed herself a brief rest, exhaustion finally catching up with the emotional and physical toll of her journey. As she sat huddled against a fallen log, trying to gather strength for the continued travel ahead, she felt something shift deep within her chest, a sharp, sudden pain unlike anything she had experienced before, as though something essential had been forcibly torn away. She gasped, pressing a hand against her ribs, wondering with growing alarm whether this represented the beginning of whatever devastating consequences the old stories had warned about. Miles away, within the walls of Ashford Castle, Damien woke abruptly from restless sleep, a searing pain tearing through his chest that left him gasping and disoriented in the darkness of his private chambers. His wolf howled within him, a sound of pure anguish and loss that he felt reverberate through every fiber of his being, though no physical sound escaped his throat. Something was terribly wrong. He could feel it with absolute certainty, a wrongness settling into his bones that defied rational explanation. He rose from his bed, his entire body trembling, and made his way toward the window, staring out at the dark forest surrounding the castle, though he could not have explained what exactly he expected to see. The bond, he realized with dawning horror. Something had happened to the bond. He dressed hurriedly and made his way through the castle's silent corridors toward the healing rooms, some desperate instinct driving him forward despite the impossibly early hour. He found the rooms empty, Elena's usual station undisturbed but clearly unoccupied, her personal quarters nearby similarly empty when he checked them moments later, a hastily written note to her healing assistant, the only evidence remaining of her recent presence. She was gone. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, and he sank against the doorframe, struggling to process the devastating truth now confirmed before him. Elena had left. Without warning, without explanation, without any farewell whatsoever, she had simply disappeared into the night, leaving him alone to face the growing agony of a bond, suddenly, violently severed by distance and separation. He did not yet fully understand the depth of the crisis now unfolding, did not yet grasp how severely this abandonment, however well-intentioned Elena's motivations might have been, would affect both his physical health and his ability to lead effectively in the difficult days ahead. But standing alone in the empty healing rooms, as dawn's first light began filtering through the windows, Damien Ashford felt something break inside him that he feared might never fully mend. The days following Elena's disappearance marked the beginning of a steady, alarming decline in Damien's condition, one that quickly became impossible for the pack to ignore. Marcus found him that first morning still standing in the empty healing rooms, his skin pale, his hands trembling with a violence that spoke of far more than simple emotional distress. "Damien, we need to get you to your chambers," Marcus said urgently, gripping his alpha's arm to steady him. "You're not well." "She's gone," Damien said, his voice hollow, distant, as though speaking from somewhere far removed from his own body. "Elena is gone, Marcus. I can feel it. Something has torn loose inside me, and I don't know how to fix it." Marcus had feared exactly this outcome since first learning about the mate bond weeks earlier, had read enough of the old accounts to understand the devastating physical toll that separation from a true mate could inflict upon an alpha's body and spirit. Watching the evidence now manifesting before him confirmed every fear he had harbored. He helped Damien back to his private chambers, summoned the pack's secondary healer since Elena remained unavailable, and began the difficult process of managing a crisis that threatened not just his alpha's well-being, but the stability of the entire pack that depended on Damien's strength and leadership. Over the following days, Damien's condition continued deteriorating despite every effort to stabilize him. He struggled to keep food down, his appetite virtually non-existent. Sleep, when it came at all, remained fitful and shallow, plagued by restless dreams that left him more exhausted upon waking than before he had closed his eyes. His wolf, usually a steady, controlled presence beneath his human consciousness, had grown erratic and volatile, surging forward unexpectedly during moments of stress or frustration in ways that alarmed everyone around him. During a pack council meeting held to address growing concerns about border security, Damien's temper snapped without warning when a minor disagreement arose regarding patrol assignments. His eyes flashed gold, his canines lengthened visibly, and for one terrifying moment, several council members feared he might lose control entirely before he managed, with visible effort, to force his wolf back beneath the surface. The pack elders exchanged worried glances following the incident, their concerns immediately turning toward rumors that had begun circulating throughout the castle regarding the alpha's sudden decline and the mysterious disappearance of the head healer that had seemingly coincided with it. Serafina, watching these developments unfold with growing alarm, found herself facing an unexpected complication to her carefully constructed plans. She had anticipated eventually exposing whatever connection existed between Damien and Elena, using the revelation to eliminate the healer as a threat to her position. She had not anticipated Elena simply removing herself from the equation voluntarily, nor had she anticipated the devastating physical consequences that separation would inflict upon her fiancé. "What is happening to him?" she demanded of Marcus during a private conversation, cornering the beta in a quiet castle corridor away from prying ears. "This isn't simple heartbreak or emotional distress. Something is genuinely wrong with him." Marcus hesitated, weighing the wisdom of revealing the full truth to Serafina, uncertain how she might react to confirmation of her worst suspicions. But watching Damien's continued deterioration, understanding that concealment served no one's interests any longer, he finally decided honesty represented the wisest path forward. "The healer, Elena, was Damien's true mate," Marcus said quietly. "The bond formed the night of your engagement announcement, though neither of them sought or welcomed it. Elena left the territory several days ago, believing her absence would ease the tension her presence was creating. Instead, it seems to be triggering exactly the crisis the old stories warn about, when a mate bond is forcibly severed." Serafina absorbed this information in silence, her expression carefully controlled despite the storm of emotions churning beneath the surface. Everything she had suspected, everything she had spent weeks investigating and confirming through careful observation, now stood revealed as absolute truth by the very beta responsible for managing pack affairs. "How severe will this become?" she asked finally, her voice carrying a coldness that surprised even herself. "I don't know," Marcus admitted honestly. "The old accounts suggest it can eventually prove fatal if left unresolved for extended periods. Damien's condition is deteriorating rapidly. If Elena doesn't return soon, or if he doesn't find some way to complete the bond despite her absence, I fear the consequences could become dire indeed." Serafina's mind raced through the implications of this revelation, weighing political calculation against a complexity of emotions she had not anticipated feeling. She had entered this engagement understanding it as a purely strategic arrangement, a union designed to secure peace and stability for both packs. She had never expected genuine affection to develop, had certainly never anticipated confronting the reality of her fiancé's life hanging in the balance due to a bond formed with another woman entirely. Part of her, the calculating political strategist who had spent years preparing for exactly this position of power, wanted to dismiss Damien's crisis as unfortunate, but ultimately manageable, a complication that could perhaps be resolved through pack healers or time, allowing her engagement and eventual marriage to proceed as originally planned. But another part of her, one she had not expected to discover within herself, recoiled at the thought of watching a man slowly die before her eyes, regardless of the political convenience his death might eventually offer her own ambitions, should she choose a different path toward power within the pack hierarchy. "What would need to happen for the bond to be completed?" she asked finally, though she already suspected she knew the answer. Elena would need to return, Marcus said simply, and accept the bond fully, alongside Damien. There's no other solution the old accounts describe that offers genuine, lasting resolution. Serafina nodded slowly, her mind already calculating the political ramifications of such an outcome. If she publicly released Damien from his engagement, allowing him to pursue his true mate openly, her own position would suffer considerable embarrassment, and her father's carefully negotiated alliance would require complete renegotiation from an entirely different foundation. But if she refused to release him, if she insisted on proceeding with a marriage built on a foundation that was actively killing her intended husband, the political consequences of his eventual death, or worse, some catastrophic loss of control that might endanger the entire pack, would prove far more devastating than any embarrassment associated with a broken engagement. She returned to her chambers that evening deeply troubled, torn between ambition and an unexpected flicker of conscience she had not anticipated discovering within herself. She thought of her father's counsel, always prioritizing strategic advantage above sentiment, and wondered what guidance he might offer, facing a crisis this complex and unprecedented. She composed another letter that night, detailing this new development in full, though she found herself hesitating over several passages, uncertain exactly what outcome she genuinely hoped her father might recommend. Meanwhile, Damien's condition continued its alarming decline. By the end of the first week following Elena's departure, he had grown too weak to attend council meetings entirely, confined to his private chambers, under the watchful care of pack healers, who could offer little more than supportive treatment for symptoms, whose true cause lay far beyond their ability to address directly. Marcus visited him daily, finding his alpha increasingly withdrawn, his golden eyes dulled with a combination of physical exhaustion and profound grief. "You need to send word to her," Marcus urged during one such visit, watching Damien stare listlessly toward the window, overlooking the same gardens where he had last spoken with Elena weeks earlier. "Even if you don't know exactly where she's gone, we can send scouts to search neighboring territories. This cannot continue, Damien. You're dying, whether you're willing to acknowledge that truth or not." "She left for good reason," Damien said weakly, though even speaking seemed to require considerable effort. "The alliance, the pack's stability, all of it depends on my engagement to Serafina proceeding as planned. I cannot simply abandon that responsibility, because my own body refuses to accept the sacrifice duty demands." "Your body isn't refusing sacrifice," Marcus said, frustration evident in his voice. "Your body is dying, Damien. There's a difference. Whatever noble intentions drove Elena to leave, whatever sense of duty continues driving your own refusal to pursue her, none of that will matter if you're not alive to lead this pack through whatever challenges lie ahead." Damien said nothing, too exhausted to argue further, though Marcus could see the truth of his words slowly penetrating through his alpha's stubborn insistence on prioritizing duty above self-preservation. That night, as Damien drifted into another restless, pain-filled sleep, Serafina made her way quietly to his chambers, dismissing the guard stationed outside with a simple explanation about checking on her fiancé's condition. She found him alone, his breathing shallow and labored, his once powerful frame looking diminished and fragile beneath the heavy blankets covering his bed. She stood beside him for a long moment, studying his pale, sweat-dampened face, feeling emotions she could not fully name or understand churning within her chest. Whatever calculated political ambition had originally driven her toward this engagement, watching him now, suffering so visibly and severely, she found herself confronting an uncomfortable truth she had spent weeks trying desperately to avoid. She could not, in good conscience, continue insisting upon a marriage that was actively killing the man she had promised to marry, regardless of what political advantages that marriage might have offered her own ambitions. She made her decision that night, standing alone beside Damien's suffering form, understanding, with sudden, painful clarity, exactly what needed to happen next, regardless of the personal cost it might demand from her own carefully constructed future. The next morning, Serafina requested an emergency session of the Pack Council, a request that surprised the elders, given her position as the Alpha's intended bride, rather than a formal council member herself. Marcus arranged the gathering quickly, sensing that whatever Serafina intended to announce likely carried significant weight for the pack's future. The council chamber filled with senior pack members, warriors, and advisors, all gathering with visible confusion and concern as word spread that Serafina herself had called this unusual meeting. Damien remained absent, too weak to attend, represented instead by Marcus, who stood near the head of the table with barely concealed worry etched across his features. Serafina stood before the assembled council, her posture composed despite the significance of what she was about to reveal. She had spent the entire night considering her words carefully, weighing exactly how much truth to share and how to frame her decision in a manner that would preserve as much stability as possible for both packs involved. "I have called this meeting to address a matter of considerable importance," she began, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was about to announce. "As many of you have likely noticed, Alpha Damien's health has declined severely over recent days. I have learned the cause of this decline, and I believe the council deserves complete honesty regarding the situation, however difficult that honesty might prove." Murmurs rippled through the gathered council members as Serafina continued, explaining the concept of the mate bond to those unfamiliar with its significance, describing how such bonds formed regardless of existing commitments or political arrangements, and how rejection, or forced separation from a true mate, could trigger exactly the physical crisis currently threatening their Alpha's life. "Alpha Damien's true mate is Elena Frost, our head healer," Serafina continued, ignoring the shocked gasps rippling through the chamber. "The bond formed the night of our engagement announcement, unknown and unwanted by either party at the time. Lena, understanding the political complications her presence created, chose to leave the territory rather than risk destabilizing our alliance. Her sacrifice, however well-intentioned, has instead triggered a crisis that now threatens Damien's life directly." The council chamber erupted into heated discussion, elders debating the implications of this revelation, questioning what such news meant for the carefully negotiated peace between the Ashford and Cole packs. Serafina allowed the discussion to continue for several minutes, before raising her hand for silence, waiting until the chamber quieted before continuing. "I have made my decision regarding this matter," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the now silent room. "I release Damien Ashford from our engagement, effective immediately. Whatever political consequences this decision brings, I refuse to continue insisting upon a marriage that is actively killing the man I promised to wed. My father will need to be informed, and new negotiations regarding our pack's relationship will need to begin, but I will not allow ambition to cost a good man his life." The chamber fell into stunned silence, council members exchanging shocked glances as they processed the magnitude of Serafina's announcement. Marcus, standing near the front of the room, felt a profound wave of relief wash over him, though concern for the practical implications of this decision remained heavy in his mind. Lady Serafina, one of the eldest council members, finally spoke, his weathered voice carrying decades of political experience. "This decision carries enormous consequences. Your father's alliance was built specifically around this marriage. Breaking the engagement now, particularly under these circumstances, risks reigniting tensions between our packs that took years to negotiate toward peace." "I understand the risks completely," Serafina replied, her composure never wavering despite the gravity of the situation. "But I would rather face difficult negotiations, even the possibility of renewed tension between our packs, than continue forward with a marriage built on a foundation that has already nearly cost a man his life. My father may be disappointed in my decision. He may even be angry. But I believe, given time to fully understand the circumstances, he will ultimately recognize that no political alliance is worth the cost of a life." As the council continued debating the practical implications of Serafina's announcement, a separate conversation began circulating quietly among certain members regarding rumors that had reached their ears in recent days, whispers suggesting that Serafina herself had engaged in troubling behavior toward Elena Frost prior to the healer's sudden disappearance. One council member, an elder named Nathaniel, who had long served as an advisor on matters of pack ethics and tradition, raised the concern directly. "Lady Serafina, while your decision to release the Alpha from his engagement speaks well of your character, I feel compelled to address separate concerns that have reached me. Several servants have reported witnessing confrontations between yourself and Elena Frost in the days preceding her departure. confrontations that some have characterized as threatening in nature. Serafina's composure flickered for the first time since the meeting began, a brief moment of visible discomfort crossing her features, before she recovered her careful control. I will not deny that I confronted Elena regarding my suspicions about her relationship with Damien. I acted from a place of fear regarding my own position and the alliance I had worked to secure. I am not proud of how I handled those confrontations, and I recognize now that my behavior may have contributed to Elena's decision to leave so abruptly. The admission, however difficult, seemed to earn her a measure of respect from several council members who recognized the courage required to acknowledge such failings publicly. Nathaniel nodded slowly, accepting her honesty even as he noted the seriousness of the matter for future reference. Given these revelations, Nathaniel continued, I believe our immediate priority must be locating Elena Frost and ensuring her safe return, both for the sake of Alpha Damien's health and to properly address whatever role our pack's internal politics played in driving her away. The council quickly organized search parties to begin scouring the surrounding territories for any sign of Elena's whereabouts, while messengers were dispatched to neighboring packs with careful, diplomatically worded inquiries regarding whether any traveler matching her description had passed through their lands recently. Marcus left the council meeting immediately to inform Damien of these developments, finding his alpha still weak but somewhat more alert than he had been in recent days, as though the mere possibility of Elena's return had already begun offering some small measure of relief to his suffering condition. Serafina released you from the engagement, Marcus explained, watching Damien's expression shift through confusion, disbelief, and finally cautious hope. The council is organizing search efforts to locate Elena. Damien, this could be the resolution we've been searching for. Why would she do that? Damien asked weakly, struggling to process the unexpected turn of events. Releasing me risks everything her father worked to build. I believe, Marcus said carefully, that watching your condition deteriorate over recent days affected her more deeply than perhaps even she anticipated. Whatever her original motivations for pursuing this engagement, I don't believe she could continue watching you suffer without taking action. Damien absorbed this information slowly, a complex mixture of gratitude and guilt settling over him. He had never wished harm upon Serafina, had entered their engagement with genuine intentions of honoring the commitment, despite lacking the deep affection that should accompany marriage. Learning that she had ultimately chosen compassion over ambition, sacrificing her own political position to protect his life, filled him with a respect for her character he had not previously fully appreciated. I need to find Elena, he said, attempting to push himself upright despite his obvious physical weakness. I cannot simply wait here while search parties comb the territories. I need to search myself. Damien, you can barely stand, Marcus protested, moving quickly to support his alpha as he swayed unsteadily. You need to recover your strength before attempting any journey. The search parties are experienced trackers. They will locate her. Every moment that passes without finding her risks making this crisis worse, Damien argued, though his body's obvious weakness undermined the conviction in his words. I feel it, Marcus. The bond growing weaker with each passing day. I don't know how much longer I can survive without resolution. Marcus studied his friend's determined expression, recognizing the stubborn resolve that had always defined Damien's character, even now weakened by physical crisis. He understood arguing further would prove futile, that Damien would insist on joining the search regardless of practical concerns about his physical condition. Then we prepare you as best we can, Marcus said finally, resigned to supporting whatever course of action his alpha chose to pursue. But you will not travel alone. I'm coming with you, and we take a small group of our most trusted warriors as additional support. If we're going to search for Elena, we do so as safely and efficiently as possible. Damien nodded weakly, gratitude evident in his exhausted expression. Thank you, Marcus, for everything. As preparations began for what would become a desperate journey to locate Elena Frost, news of the broken engagement and its underlying cause spread rapidly throughout the pack, generating a complex mixture of sympathy, concern, and cautious optimism among pack members who had grown genuinely fond of both their alpha and their healer over the years of faithful service each had provided to the community. Serafina, meanwhile, retreated to her chambers to compose the difficult letter she now needed to send her father, explaining her decision and the circumstances that had prompted it. She understood the political complications her choice would create, understood that renegotiating the alliance between their packs would require considerable diplomatic effort in the months ahead. But sitting alone in her chambers, reflecting on the events of recent weeks, she found herself surprisingly at peace with her decision, despite the uncertainty it created for her own future position and prospects. She had entered this engagement believing power and strategic advantage represented the most important considerations guiding her choices. She left it, having learned something more valuable, a lesson about the genuine cost of ambition, pursued without regard for the well-being of others. Whatever came next for her own future, whatever new political arrangements her father might eventually negotiate, she found herself hoping genuinely that Damien would find his way back to health and happiness, reunited with the true mate fate had chosen for him, regardless of how inconvenient that choice had proven for her own carefully laid plans. The search party departed Ashford territory 2 days later, Damien riding at the front, despite Marcus's continued concerns about his physical condition. His strength had improved marginally since Serafina's announcement, whether from the hope of eventual reunion with Elena or simple stubborn determination, but he remained visibly weakened, requiring frequent rest stops that frustrated his desperate desire to move quickly. They traveled first toward the eastern territories, following reports from a border patrol that had spotted a lone traveler matching Elena's description several days earlier. The journey took them through dense forest and across rocky terrain, the small group of warriors accompanying Damien and Marcus, maintaining careful watch for any signs of danger, whether from rival packs or simple wilderness hazards that might threaten their weakened alpha. "We should make camp soon," Marcus suggested as afternoon light began fading toward evening, watching Damien's increasingly labored breathing with growing concern. "You need rest, Damien, regardless of how much you want to continue pushing forward." "We're close," Damien insisted, though even he could hear the strain in his own voice. "I can feel it, Marcus. Something has shifted in the past hour, like the distance between us is finally narrowing rather than growing wider." Marcus exchanged glances with the other warriors, uncertain whether to trust his alpha's claims, given his obviously compromised physical state, but reluctant to dismiss instincts that had proven reliable throughout years of successful leadership. "We continue a little further, but if you show any signs of collapse, we make camp immediately, regardless of how close we might be." They pressed onward as darkness began settling over the forest, the warriors lighting torches to guide their path through increasingly unfamiliar terrain. Damien's senses, despite his physical weakness, seemed to sharpen with each passing mile, his wolf stirring with an intensity he had not felt since Elena's initial departure, as though sensing they drew closer to resolving the crushing absence that had nearly claimed his life. Near midnight, they came upon a small village, situated at the edge of neutral territory, a modest settlement inhabited by wolves who had chosen independence from any major pack affiliation, preferring instead a quiet existence removed from the political complications that governed larger territorial arrangements. "We should ask if anyone has seen her," Marcus suggested, gesturing toward a small inn whose windows still glowed with lamplight despite the late hour. "This seems like exactly the kind of place someone might choose if they wanted to disappear from pack politics entirely." Damien nodded, and together with 2 of their accompanying warriors, they approached the inn, hoping desperately that their journey might finally near its conclusion. The innkeeper, an older wolf with graying fur visible even in his human form, studied the group with obvious wariness upon their entrance, unaccustomed to visitors from major packs arriving at such a late hour. "We're searching for a healer," Damien explained, forcing steadiness into his voice despite his exhaustion. "A woman, dark hair, gentle manner, likely arrived in this area within the past few weeks. Her name is Elena." The innkeeper's expression shifted subtly at the mention of Elena's name, a flicker of recognition that immediately caught Marcus's attention. "We might have someone matching that description staying nearby," he said cautiously. "Living under a different name, mind you, but the description fits well enough. May I ask what business a group from Ashford territory has with her?" "She's—" Damien paused, uncertain how much to reveal to a stranger, though desperation eventually won over caution. "She's my true mate. I need to find her, urgently. Her absence has caused a crisis that threatens my life if left unresolved much longer. The innkeeper studied Damien carefully, taking in his obviously weakened condition, the pale exhaustion evident in his features, despite the urgency driving his words. Whatever skepticism he might have initially harbored seemed to fade as he recognized the genuine desperation motivating this late-night inquiry. "She's staying in a small cottage at the village's edge," the innkeeper finally said. "Been working as our local healer these past weeks, going by the name Rosalind. Kept mostly to herself, though she's been a genuine blessing to our community given how far we usually have to travel for proper medical care." Relief flooded through Damien with such intensity that he nearly collapsed on the spot, only Marcus's quick support keeping him upright. "Can you direct us there?" Marcus asked, understanding that his alpha's condition demanded urgent resolution now that their search had finally yielded results. The innkeeper provided careful directions, and within minutes, the group had departed the inn, making their way through the sleeping village toward the small cottage described. Damien's heart pounded with a mixture of desperate hope and lingering fear as they approached, uncertain exactly how Elena might react to his sudden, unexpected arrival after weeks of deliberate separation. They reached the cottage, a modest structure, with a single lit window suggesting its occupant remained awake despite the late hour. Damien approached alone, gesturing for Marcus and the warriors to remain at a respectful distance, understanding intuitively that whatever conversation followed needed to occur without an audience. He knocked softly on the wooden door, his hand trembling with exhaustion and nervous anticipation in equal measure. For a long moment, nothing happened, and Damien feared perhaps the innkeeper's information had proven mistaken after all. Then he heard footsteps approaching from within, followed by the sound of the door's latch being carefully released. The door opened, and Elena stood before him, her expression shifting rapidly from cautious wariness to complete shock as she recognized who stood on her doorstep. She looked different than he remembered, her hair pulled back simply, dressed in plain clothing suited to her assumed identity as a village healer rather than the more formal attire she had worn within Ashford Castle. But her eyes remained exactly the same, warm and gentle, despite the obvious exhaustion visible in their depths. "Damien," she breathed, her voice barely more than a whisper, "how did you find me?" "It doesn't matter how," he said, his own voice rough with emotion and physical weakness combined. "I found you. That's all that matters right now." She studied him for a long moment, taking in his obviously weakened condition, the pale exhaustion etched into features that had always carried strength and vitality during their previous encounters. Concern immediately overtook her shock. "You're not well," she said, reaching instinctively toward him, before catching herself and pulling back. "What happened?" "The bond," he said simply. "Your absence nearly killed me, Elena. I've spent the past 3 weeks fighting against a decline that the pack healers couldn't fully understand or treat. Serafina eventually released me from our engagement, understanding that continuing to pursue marriage, while I remained tied to you through this bond, would only continue causing harm." Elena's hand flew to her mouth, horror and guilt washing over her features, as she absorbed the magnitude of what her well-intentioned departure had actually caused. "I never meant. I thought leaving would help, would ease the pressure on you, on the alliance. I never imagined it would cause you physical harm." "I know," Damien said gently, taking a careful step closer despite his exhaustion. "I know you left believing you were protecting everyone, sacrificing your own happiness for the greater good. But Elena, some sacrifices simply aren't meant to be made. This bond between us, it's not something either of us chose consciously, but it's also not something we can simply reject without devastating consequences." Tears began streaming down Elena's cheeks as weeks of accumulated grief and guilt finally broke free from the careful control she had maintained since her departure. "I've been so afraid," she admitted, her voice breaking. "Afraid I made everything worse by leaving. Afraid I would never see you again. Afraid this entire situation would somehow destroy both our lives, regardless of what choices we made." "Then let's stop being afraid," Damien said softly, closing the remaining distance between them, despite his weakened legs threatening to give out beneath him. "Let's stop trying to fight against something that was never meant to be fought. Elena, I choose you. Openly, completely, regardless of whatever political complications that choice creates. I should have made this choice from the very beginning, rather than allowing duty to override what my heart and my wolf both recognized as truth from the first moment our eyes met. Elena searched his face for any hesitation, any lingering doubt that might suggest this declaration stemmed merely from desperation or physical crisis, rather than genuine conviction. She found none, only exhausted, absolute certainty reflected in eyes that had haunted her dreams throughout every lonely night of her self-imposed exile. "Are you certain?" she asked softly. "Damien, this choice carries real consequences. Your father's alliance with the Coal Pack, the stability you've worked to maintain throughout your reign, all of it could be affected by openly acknowledging our bond." "I have never been more certain of anything in my entire life," Damien said, and the raw conviction in his voice left no room for doubt. "I nearly died these past weeks, Elena. That experience taught me something important about what genuinely matters versus what merely feels important due to duty and expectation. I refuse to spend whatever time I have remaining pretending this bond doesn't exist, or that some alternative path toward happiness might somehow prove less painful than embracing what fate has clearly chosen for both of us." Elena's tears flowed more freely now, though they carried relief and joy rather than the grief that had defined her recent weeks of solitary existence. "Then I choose you too," she whispered. "I never stopped choosing you, Damien. Not really. I simply convinced myself that choosing duty over desire represented the more responsible path forward." As their eyes met in the dim lamplight spilling from her cottage doorway, something powerful and undeniable settled into place between them, the mate bond finally beginning its true completion after weeks of painful, forced separation. Damien felt strength returning to his exhausted body with each passing moment, as though simply standing near Elena again had begun reversing the devastating decline that separation had inflicted upon him. He reached for her hand, and she accepted it without hesitation, their fingers intertwining with a naturalness that felt like coming home after a long, difficult journey through unfamiliar territory. Neither of them spoke for a long moment, simply standing together in comfortable silence, allowing the weight of weeks of separation and fear to finally lift from their shoulders. "We should discuss what comes next," Elena finally said, though reluctance colored her voice at the thought of breaking this peaceful moment. "We will," Damien agreed, "but not tonight. Tonight, I simply want to remember what it feels like to stand beside you without fear or hesitation, clouding everything between us." Behind them, watching from a respectful distance, Marcus finally allowed himself to relax, relief flooding through him as he witnessed the reunion he had hoped and worked toward throughout their desperate journey. Whatever complications awaited them upon their return to Ashford territory, whatever difficult conversations and political negotiations lay ahead, at least for tonight, both his alpha and the healer who had captured his heart could simply exist together, finally free from the painful separation that had nearly destroyed them both. Elena insisted on tending to Damien's condition before allowing any further conversation that night, her healer's instincts overriding the emotional intensity of their reunion. She guided him inside her small cottage, settling him near the modest fireplace while she prepared a warming tea from herbs she had gathered during her weeks in the village, ingredients known to help restore strength to those suffering from exhaustion and physical decline. "Drink this slowly," she instructed, pressing the warm cup into his hands. "Your body has been through considerable strain these past weeks. Recovery won't happen instantly, even now that we're reunited." Damien accepted the tea gratefully, already feeling noticeably stronger simply from her proximity, though he recognized the wisdom in her caution against expecting immediate, complete recovery. "How did you end up here specifically?" he asked, curious despite his exhaustion. "This village, so far from Ashford territory?" "I wanted somewhere far enough removed from pack politics that no one would think to search for me easily," Elena explained, settling into a chair across from him. "This community accepts wolves regardless of pack affiliation, and they needed a healer badly enough that questions about my background remained minimal. I assumed a different name, told them I was traveling, and decided to settle here permanently." "You truly intended to stay away permanently?" Damien asked, something painful crossing his features at the thought. Elena hesitated before answering honestly. "I told myself that story, yes. I believed convincing myself of permanence would make the separation easier to bear, would prevent me from constantly hoping for circumstances to change enough that I might eventually return. Before Damien could respond further, urgent voices erupted outside the cottage, followed by Marcus's alarmed shout calling for Damien's immediate attention. Both Elena and Damien rose quickly, concern replacing the intimate atmosphere that had briefly settled over their reunion. Outside, they found Marcus and the accompanying warriors standing alert, weapons drawn, facing a group of unfamiliar wolves who had emerged from the surrounding forest, with clearly hostile intent radiating from their tense postures. "Cole warriors," Marcus said grimly as Damien approached, his hand instinctively moving to rest protectively near Elena. "They must have tracked our movement from Ashford territory." A tall wolf stepped forward from the group, his expression carrying barely controlled fury as his gaze fixed on Damien. "Alpha Ashford," he said, his voice tight with hostility. "Lord Cole demands answers regarding the broken engagement and the insult delivered to his daughter's honor. He has sent us to ensure you understand the seriousness of this betrayal." "There has been no betrayal here," Damien said, forcing authority into his voice, despite his still recovering physical condition. "Serafina made her own decision regarding the engagement, understanding fully the circumstances that necessitated it. I would ask that Lord Cole direct his concerns through proper diplomatic channels, rather than sending armed warriors to confront me in neutral territory." "Lord Cole's daughter has been publicly humiliated," the warrior spat back, his companions shifting restlessly behind him, clearly primed for potential conflict, despite the technically neutral ground they currently occupied. "Word has already spread throughout the Northern Territories that you abandoned her for a common healer. Such insult demands response." Elena felt fear tighten her chest as the tension continued escalating, understanding with growing dread that her presence here, her very existence as Damien's true mate, had potentially ignited exactly the political catastrophe she had originally fled Ashford territory hoping to prevent. "This is neutral territory," Marcus interjected firmly, stepping slightly forward to place himself between the hostile warriors and his still weakened alpha. "Violence here would violate agreements respected by every pack in the Northern Territories for generations. I suggest your group return to Lord Cole and arrange proper diplomatic discussion rather than pursuing confrontation that serves no one's genuine interests." The lead Cole warrior's expression remained hard, clearly torn between his orders and the practical wisdom of Marcus's warning regarding neutral territory protections. Several tense moments passed, the two groups facing each other with barely restrained hostility, before the warrior finally lowered his weapon slightly, though his expression remained far from friendly. "This matter is not finished," he warned, his gaze shifting pointedly toward Elena before returning to Damien. "Lord Cole will not simply accept this insult quietly. Expect formal communication regarding the consequences of this betrayal." The Cole warriors retreated back into the forest as suddenly as they had appeared, leaving the Ashford group standing tense and alert in the aftermath of the confrontation. Elena's hands trembled as the immediate danger passed, the reality of the situation's complexity settling heavily over her. "This is exactly what I feared," she said quietly, once the warriors had disappeared entirely from view. "Damien, if Lord Cole pursues real retaliation, if this escalates into actual conflict between our packs, the consequences could prove catastrophic. Perhaps I should have remained hidden, remained separate from your life entirely, regardless of the personal cost." "No," Damien said firmly, turning to face her directly despite his continued physical weakness. "Elena, listen to me carefully. This situation would have escalated eventually, regardless of your continued absence. Lord Cole's anger stems from the broken engagement itself, not specifically from knowledge of our reunion tonight. Whatever political consequences follow, we will face them together, honestly, rather than continuing to hide behind sacrifice and separation that nearly cost me my life without actually solving the underlying political tension." Marcus nodded in agreement, his expression thoughtful despite the recent confrontation's lingering tension. "Damien is right, Elena. This confrontation tonight, difficult as it was, actually provides useful information. We now know Lord Cole's likely response to the broken engagement, which allows us to prepare appropriate diplomatic strategy before returning to Ashford territory." Elena remained unconvinced entirely, worry still evident in her expression. but she recognized the wisdom in Marcus's perspective. Hiding indefinitely had never represented a truly sustainable solution, merely a temporary delay of confrontations that circumstances would eventually force, regardless of her personal preferences. "We should return to Ashford as soon as your strength allows," Marcus suggested, addressing Damien directly. "The sooner we begin formal diplomatic outreach to Lord Cole, explaining the full circumstances surrounding Seraphina's decision, the better chance we have of resolving this tension before it escalates into something more serious." Damien nodded, though exhaustion remained evident in his features, despite the temporary strength his reunion with Elena had provided. "Agreed. We rest tonight, here in the village where neutral territory protections offer some measure of security, and depart for Ashford at first light." That night, Elena insisted Damien remain in her cottage rather than seeking separate lodging at the village inn, citing continued concern for his recovering health that required careful monitoring. Marcus and the accompanying warriors established watch positions around the small structure, ensuring no further surprise confrontations could threaten their group during the remaining hours of darkness. Elena prepared a simple meal, insisting Damien eat properly despite his diminished appetite, understanding that proper nutrition remained essential to his continued physical recovery. They talked quietly throughout the evening, catching up on weeks of separation, discussing the complicated political situation now facing them, planning carefully how best to approach the difficult conversations that awaited their return to Ashford territory. "I keep thinking about what almost happened," Elena admitted during a quiet moment as the fire crackled softly beside them. "If Marcus hadn't found you in time, if the search party had taken even a few more days to locate this village, I don't know that you would have survived long enough for us to have this conversation at all." "But he did find me in time," Damien said gently, reaching for her hand across the small distance separating them. "And here we are, together, facing whatever challenges come next. That has to count for something, Elena. We cannot spend our future constantly dwelling on the dangers we narrowly avoided in the past." She nodded slowly, though the fear lingered visibly in her expression. "I suppose I've grown accustomed to expecting disaster after everything that's happened these past weeks. Learning to trust that things might actually work out favorably feels almost foreign to me now." "Then we learn together," Damien said softly. "One day at a time, one challenge at a time, regardless of whatever complications Lord Cole or anyone else might attempt to introduce into our path forward." As the fire slowly burned down toward embers, and exhaustion finally claimed them both, Elena found herself feeling something she had not experienced in weeks, a fragile but genuine sense of hope for whatever future awaited them beyond the difficult political negotiations and potential conflicts still looming ahead. Whatever challenges Lord Cole's anger might eventually produce, whatever difficult conversations awaited their return to Ashford territory, at least now they would face those challenges together, honestly, rather than continuing to hide behind sacrifice and separation that had nearly destroyed them both. The following morning, the group departed the village at first light. Damien's strength noticeably improved after a full night's rest alongside Elena's healing care. The journey back toward Ashford territory proceeded without further incident, though tension remained evident among the accompanying warriors, all remaining alert for any sign that Lord Cole's warriors might attempt additional confrontation before they reached the relative safety of home territory. They crossed back into Ashford lands by late afternoon, the familiar landmarks providing welcome relief after the uncertainty of recent days. Word of their successful search had apparently traveled ahead of their actual arrival, as pack members began gathering along the roadway leading toward the castle, eager to witness firsthand whether their alpha had truly located his missing true mate. Elena felt nervous anticipation building within her chest as they approached the castle gates, uncertain exactly how the broader pack community might receive news of her return and the complicated circumstances surrounding her relationship with their alpha. She had spent years serving this community faithfully as their healer, but the political complexity now surrounding her position felt entirely different from anything she had previously navigated. Damien, sensing her nervousness, reached for her hand as they approached the gathering crowd. "Whatever happens next," he said quietly, "we face it together. I promise you that, Elena, regardless of what challenges still lie ahead." She nodded, drawing strength from his steady presence beside her, and together, they rode through the castle gates, toward whatever awaited them within the walls of Ashford Castle, ready finally to face their future openly and honestly, without the burden of secrecy and sacrifice that had nearly destroyed everything they both held dear. News of Damien's successful return spread through Ashford Castle within minutes, and by the time the group reached the Great Hall, a significant crowd of pack members had already gathered, eager to witness the resolution of a crisis that had gripped their community's attention for weeks. Whispered conversations filled the space as people took in Elena's presence beside their alpha, noting the visible improvement in his condition compared to the alarming decline they had witnessed prior to his departure. Serafina stood near the front of the gathered crowd, having received word of the group's return and choosing to witness the moment personally rather than avoiding what would undoubtedly prove an emotionally complex scene. Her expression remained carefully composed as Damien and Elena entered the hall together, though something like genuine relief flickered briefly across her features upon confirming his obviously improved health. Damien addressed the gathered crowd directly, understanding that transparency now represented the wisest path forward, given how thoroughly rumors and speculation had already spread throughout the pack during his absence. "Many of you have heard fragments of the situation that unfolded these past weeks," he began, his voice carrying clearly despite lingering exhaustion from the journey. "I owe this pack complete honesty regarding what happened and what comes next for our community." He explained the mate bond that had formed the night of his engagement announcement, the impossible choice it had created between duty and instinct, Elena's difficult decision to leave in hopes of protecting the alliance, and the devastating physical crisis that separation had subsequently triggered. He spoke of Serafina's courage in releasing him from their engagement, despite the political complications that decision created, and of the desperate search that had finally reunited him with his true mate. "I stand before you today to formally declare Elena Frost as my chosen Luna," Damien announced, turning to face Elena directly as he spoke the words that would forever change both their futures. "Not through political arrangement or strategic calculation, but through the bond fate itself has chosen for us. I understand this declaration creates complicated diplomatic challenges regarding our relationship with the Coal Pack, challenges I intend to address personally and honestly in the days ahead, but I refuse to continue hiding truth that nearly cost me my life to deny." A moment of silence followed his declaration, before the Great Hall erupted into a mixture of reactions, some pack members cheering enthusiastically at the resolution of their beloved healer's romantic story with their alpha, others exchanging more cautious glances as they considered the political implications of formally abandoning the Coal Alliance in favor of this unexpected turn of events. Elena stood beside Damien, her heart pounding as she absorbed the weight of this public declaration, understanding that her life had just transformed irrevocably from quiet service as pack healer toward the far more visible and demanding role of Luna, partner to the Alpha King, in leading and protecting their entire community. Nathaniel, the council elder who had previously raised concerns about Serafina's earlier confrontations with Elena, stepped forward from the crowd, his weathered expression carrying the weight of decades spent navigating pack politics and tradition. "Alpha Damien," he said formally, "while I respect the power and significance of the mate bond you describe, this council must carefully consider the practical implications of formally severing our alliance with the Coal Pack. Lord Cole's anger, as demonstrated by the confrontation your search party experienced, suggests this transition will require careful diplomatic management to avoid genuine conflict between our territories." "I understand completely," Damien replied, his tone respectful despite the challenge implicit in Nathaniel's words. "I intend to personally travel to meet with Lord Cole once my strength has fully recovered, offering honest explanation for these developments and proposing alternative arrangements that might preserve peaceful relations between our packs, without requiring marriage as the foundation for that peace." Serafina, watching this exchange with careful attention, finally stepped forward herself, addressing the gathered crowd directly for the first time since Damien's return. "I would like to add my own perspective to this discussion," she said, her voice carrying the same composed authority that had characterized her public presence throughout her time within Ashford territory. "I released Damien from our engagement freely, understanding fully the circumstances that necessitated such action. I do not regret this decision, despite the political complications it has created. I would ask that the council consider working alongside me to help negotiate appropriate resolution with my father, given my unique position to offer perspective and insight into his likely concerns and priorities. The offer surprised many in the crowd, though Marcus, who had witnessed Serafina's genuine transformation throughout the crisis, nodded approvingly at her willingness to continue offering constructive assistance, despite the personal disappointment her broken engagement undoubtedly represented. "That offer is genuinely appreciated," Damien said sincerely, addressing Serafina directly. "Your wisdom and political insight would prove invaluable in navigating these negotiations successfully. I hope, despite everything that has transpired, that we might continue maintaining productive relations between our packs, built now on honest foundation rather than the strategic convenience that originally brought us together." Serafina inclined her head in acknowledgement, a genuine, if somewhat bittersweet smile touching her lips. "I would like that as well, Alpha Damien. Perhaps our pack's relationship, while requiring different foundation than originally planned, can still achieve the peace and stability both our fathers originally sought to establish." Over the following weeks, careful diplomatic negotiations began between Ashford and Cole territories, with Serafina playing a crucial advisory role in helping bridge the gap between her father's initial fury and eventual acceptance of the changed circumstances. Lord Cole remained displeased by the broken engagement, but gradually, through careful diplomacy and Serafina's genuine advocacy for peaceful resolution, tensions eased toward a new arrangement that preserved cooperative relations between the two packs, without requiring marriage as the binding foundation. Elena, meanwhile, began the difficult transition into her new role as Luna, working alongside pack elders and advisors to learn the complex responsibilities that position demanded, while continuing her beloved healing work whenever her schedule permitted. The pack, having witnessed firsthand the devastating consequences that had nearly claimed their alpha's life during his forced separation from his true mate, welcomed Elena's new position with genuine warmth and support, recognizing the powerful bond that had ultimately proven undeniable, despite every political complication working against it. 3 months after Damien's dramatic reunion with Elena, Ashford Castle prepared once again for a grand ceremony, though this occasion carried entirely different meaning than the engagement announcement that had originally set this complex story into motion. Representatives from neighboring packs, including a formal delegation from Cole territory, led personally by Serafina herself, gathered to witness the official completion of the mate bond between their Alpha King and his true Luna. Elena stood before the assembled crowd, dressed in flowing garments that honored both her role as healer and her new position as Luna, her heart full of a happiness she had once believed impossible, given the political complications that had originally threatened to keep her and Damien permanently separated. Beside her, Damien looked every bit the powerful, confident Alpha King his pack needed him to be, his health fully restored, his eyes carrying warmth and certainty that had been entirely absent during those difficult weeks of forced separation months earlier. "Pack of Ashford." Damien's voice rolled across the hall, echoing words spoken months earlier, under vastly different circumstances. "Tonight, I present to you the woman who stands beside me, not through political arrangement, but through the truth that fate itself declared undeniable. Elena Ashford, your Luna, chosen not despite every obstacle placed before us, but proven stronger than every single one." The crowd erupted into genuine enthusiastic celebration, wolves howling their approval toward the star-filled sky above the castle, their voices rising in joyful harmony that echoed the powerful bond finally allowed to flourish, without fear or hidden secrecy weighing it down. As the celebration continued around them, Damien turned to Elena, taking her hands gently in his own. "We made it," he said softly, emotion evident in his voice despite the surrounding festivities. "Through everything, every obstacle, every moment of doubt and fear, we finally made it here together." "We did," Elena agreed, tears of joy rather than grief shimmering in her eyes this time. "Though I confess, I never could have imagined this particular path toward happiness when I first watched you promise your future to someone else that night, months ago." "Fate rarely follows the paths we expect," Damien said, a genuine smile lighting his features. "But I have learned, through everything we've endured together, that the paths fate ultimately chooses tend to lead exactly where we're meant to be. regardless of how difficult or uncertain the journey toward that destination might initially appear. As the celebration continued late into the night, wolves throughout Ashford territory howling their joyful voices toward the star-scattered sky, Damien and Elena stood together at the heart of their pack, finally free from the secrets and sacrifices that had nearly torn them apart, ready now to face whatever future awaited them, together, as fate had always intended from that very first moment their eyes had met months earlier, in a quiet healing room that had changed both their lives forever.